Hello, friends. Welcome back to Love Wrestling. I am very, very excited to bring you my guest today, one that I've wanted to have on the show for a while. I've got no issue saying a Canadian wrestling icon, Speedball Mike Bailey, joining me on the show. Looking surprised, but damn it, man, you shouldn't. You're a guy that I enjoy watching wrestle a lot, and a guy that a lot of Canadians and a lot of professional wrestling fans absolutely love watching worldwide. I'm just lucky that we get to call you a Canadian, man. How are you doing? How are things over on the east coast of the Great White North?
I'm very well, thank you. By the way, Canadian wrestling legend, icon. You said icon or legend? I can't even
Icon.
remember. Icon. Okay, not
Icon.
legend. Not quite there yet, but really appreciate that. Things are good here. Nice day. Gyms are open. Things are looking
Good.
slightly better, but like they also might get worse. So
I feel like that's sort of the roller coaster we've all been riding. You know, I can't speak to the United States or anywhere else, but at least over here in Alberta and Canada wide, it feels like, oh, things are getting better until they're not. And then they're getting
right,
better and then they're not. But as far as
exactly.
Quebec goes, it's nice to hear the gyms are open, that sort of stuff. On the wrestling end of things, like, how have you been able to stay in it? Have you been able to access a ring? Has it been more of a, study game tape and watch matches to stay prepared? Or how's it been on your end of things?
Well, so the study and watch game tape and like watch matches and break them down and stuff, that is a constant in my life. That is something that I've never stopped doing, like when I was wrestling or even during pandemic. But I have been teaching at the IWS wrestling school here in Montreal since a little bit before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had many different stages of being able to do normal classes to being able to do classes but with no physical contact
Mm-hmm.
to online classes and then back to online classes and just back and forth like that. But mostly I've been able to at least access the ring and still bump around and stay loose.
Good.
So I'm hoping I haven't lost that much and I'll be able to get back into things when it starts again.
Well, absolutely, my friend. Isn't that the reason that you got into streaming on Twitch? I remember listening to an interview that you said it was because of having to hop online that you started doing that. And selfishly, I'm just starting to get into Twitch myself, but you have been a guy that I've really, really enjoyed following, both for sort of the wrestling related stuff and then even stuff like learning Japanese with Mike Bailey. So, am I correct in that? And how have you enjoyed hopping into another side of the professional wrestling side of things?
Yeah, it's been really great. Again, a lot of it is about like wanting to keep that connection with my audience and,
Hmm.
build a lot of relationships with people and just let that go doesn't seem like something I want to do, but also there's a lot of great people that I like people. It's a weird thing in wrestling and traveling where you'll become really, really close friends with someone despite only seeing them like once every other month, maybe twice a
Yeah.
year. Um, and like I used to see these people, every once in a while, but then there's a lot that I haven't seen at all
Hmm.
from not traveling for a year and being able to reconnect. I've had a lot of conversations as well on Twitch that I put on my YouTube channel that are a lot of fun with the people like with whom I wanted to speak. So it's been a great way to stay connected. And it's a whole other thing. Like I'm approaching Twitch differently in that
Hmm.
I've always approached social media or like Twitter followers, Instagram as like just a compliment to my wrestling and knowing that my follower count on there or whatever will grow with my wrestling. But Twitch, my approach has really been okay, I want to try this and take this on as a challenge and try to make it grow as much as I can. And
Hmm.
that's been lots of fun. Again, playing with it, trying different things, like doing my Duolingo Japanese lessons on Twitch has been a lot of fun. Watching wrestling. I recently started doing a stream all in French where
Hmm.
I people call in and I take recommendations for matches that have francophones in them, wrestlers that speak French. So that's been a lot of fun as well. And I'm just playing around and discovering new things and enjoying it.
I love it, man. Now, it's a bit of an, outweigh question, I guess. I don't really have a better way to put it, but you're a great professional wrestler, and everybody's
Thank
spoken
you.
very highly of you as a trainer. But there are a lot of great professional wrestlers out there who maybe aren't as great at the training side of things. What do you think makes you a great trainer, and why do you think people keep referring to you as one of those guys who is a must learn from? I suppose.
So I think it's twofold. Really, I started like teaching, and I've always like approached teaching as its own art form. I
Hmm.
learned very like early in my life that it's not because you're good at something that you're going to be a good trainer or coach,
Hmm.
which reminds me of a specific story that happened to me when I was in a Taekwondo competition as a blue belt. So only a few years in, I was fighting this guy who I was probably about, I want to say 13 or 14. I was fighting this guy who was being coached by the world champion at that time. His coach was the previous year's world champion in his category in
Cool.
Taekwondo. So it was like, wow, okay, this guy's going to be good. But like the guy I was fighting, I was just faster than him. I was beating him to every punch and I was winning. And
Yeah.
then I remember mid fight, his coach was like yelling at him to, like, when I attack him with a left leg roundhouse kick, to do a counter back kick, which would be the proper counter. But the
Mhm.
guy was just not fast enough to do it. And the coach kept yelling it and yelling it. And I remember I scored the left leg roundhouse, looked over my shoulder at his coach, and his coach just went,
Come on.
come on. Yeah, I like, friend, we know that you could do it. That doesn't mean your guy can. And like, just this very long story to say that I understand that it's not because you're good at something that you're going to be good at teaching it as well. So I really approach teaching as an art. I started teaching Taekwondo when I was around 15 or 16. So I really like always had that mentality of, whenever I learn a skill, I also want to figure out how to pass it on. And
Mhm.
so I want to break it down. And I see
Yeah.
a lot of excellent wrestlers that know very well what works for them and how they can have a good match and what they need to do to make sure they consistently have an amazing match on every card. But they don't really understand, because they didn't take the time to break it down. They don't really understand why this works and if it would work for someone else and what works for what kind of pro wrestler. And then also, like, how that grows and how to help someone grow is a very different thing. I feel like if you're not used to coaching or teaching at all, you sort of expect people to just do something after they're told, which is not
Mhm.
how things work at all. My favorite example for that is this a video thing, by the way?
Yeah, you betcha. Don't worry,
Good.
everybody will
Okay.
see you.
Perfect. So, have you ever done any boxing, by the way?
Somewhat, but I can tell you I wasn't very good at it.
Okay, perfect. All you need is a minimal understanding of boxing to understand my analogy. First thing they'll tell you in boxing is, when you throw that right cross, keep your left hand up, right?
Mhm.
Always keep a hand by your face
Yeah.
every time. And then you're going to drill it forever. You throw a right cross, keep your left hand up. And then people, okay, it's time to do some light sparring. First thing they do, left goes straight down without
Yeah.
fail every time. But that's my analogy for learning. You can't just tell someone to do something and expect them to do it. It needs to be drilled, and
Yeah.
it needs to be understood.
Yeah, I would have to assume then that the Taekwondo background and the combat sports background would have helped a ton for that, right? Like, I've never stepped in the ring myself, so if there's anywhere that I'm being disrespectful or just wrong, just tell me. But
Of
I'd have
course.
to assume in a sport like professional wrestling, where you're not supposed to be hurting someone, versus Taekwondo, where I would again assume that that might not be the goal. It has to be very different for you in that sense, hey?
um Sort of, but not really. I mean, the part that's helped me the most through martial arts and fighting sports and whatever, into pro wrestling, is just learning how to learn. Like,
Okay.
learning a skill and learning that it's okay to be bad at something, and then eventually, like, how growth curves work,
Mhm.
and you get bad and then you get good, and then you realize you're bad, and then you start to get good for real, and then you start thinking you're good, so then you get bad again. And knowing that happens and that it's normal is the main thing.
Yeah.
Anytime someone asks me, like, oh, I'd like to become a pro wrestler, what should I do? And the answer, like, best thing you can do is master a skill.
Mhm.
Anything, just find what works for you and then bring it to pro wrestling. It's probably better if it's like more direct, right? Like, if you're going to learn
Mhm.
mixed martial arts, it's going to help you as a professional wrestler a little bit more than, let's say, painting.
Yeah.
But still, the act of learning how to paint and getting from being a terrible paint to a great paint is still going to translate to when you learn professional wrestling.
Absolutely. It's all in the process, not the destination, to take a cliche, right?
Correct. That is exactly true, but it's difficult. Like, that's not it. People, just human beings, just do not know that. They
Mhm.
have to learn that at some point.
It's assuming that you're good right off the bat and sort of pushing away the monopoly board when you're not great right off the bat,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
As a trainer, it's kind of unique for me that you started training under what a lot of people would say is, where you should at 18, 19. You were a lot younger than that when you started training. Would you sort of be the belief now that you've stepped into the other side of it that maybe they should be training older, or that you should have started training older, or maybe should be people training younger if they've got the opportunity?
Twofold. I feel that it helped my career a lot that I started training as young as I was. I started, in all honesty, I started doing pro wrestling at home when I was 7. I started training for real when I was much older, but I started doing it when I was 7. And I think it's great. I think if you want to have the best chance at achieving your goals in professional wrestling, you want to start as young as possible. But also, I wish there was a lot more supervision. Like, I did okay, and I was very lucky. But I feel like if it was any other 15-year-old, I was like, maybe your parents should be involved in supervising you a lot more than mine did. So
Have a
I
waiver
wish,
signed or
yes,
something.
yes. But yeah, I hear stories of where it's very loose and like going like out on the road at that age, which I really didn't do much. Also, I always had my older brother with me, he was several years older, and he had been wrestling for a while, and like we would always travel together. So it's not like I was just a 15-year-old just going on long road trips on my own.
Yeah.
I was at least well surrounded, which I'm sure helped a lot. But yeah, I think so. Starting young is good, but also if you're supervised and have a nice,
Starting
pace.
young within reason.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you've said before your first memory of wrestling was Kane burning the Brood.
That's right. Well, trying. I don't think he actually did set them on fire. That only happened recently. I think The Fiend was the first time someone was actually set ablaze in the WWE ring.
The first actual victory by Inferno.
Yeah, correct. I think Kane was only trying, but it was still enough to get me hooked.
Well, despite his best efforts, I know that obviously at that sort of age, I'd assume it's sort of 5, 6, 7, like you say, if you're starting to wrestle indoors at 7 years old. But you're a guy who's definitely got a character, but certainly not any sort of supernatural or anything like that sort of stuff. Was that ever something that you wanted to do? Was step sort of into the Kane, the Brood, the Fiend, the Mordecai side of things? Or have you always been very excited and very driven to be like the combat sports and Taekwondo and martial arts based character that you are?
So no, because that is the first thing I saw in professional wrestling, but that is not the side of professional wrestling that really got me hooked. It was a lot when I was a lot older, honestly, and I saw, like, I always wanted to do it just because I thought it was so cool, but it wasn't until much later, and I saw guys like Amazing Red and AJ Styles and Matt Sydal and Low Ki do the kind of wrestling that they did, that I was like, oh wow, okay, this is really cool. This is what I would really like to do, right? Whereas, because I liked the Hardy Boys and X-Pac when I was a child because I felt like I could relate to their style a little bit more. There was no part of me that was watching Kane or The Undertaker or The Big Show or Bradshaw being like, oh, I could do that, because I realized that I was never going to be 8 feet tall like they are.
Well, and it's pretty hard to bring thunder from the sky. I figured that'd be something that'd be pretty difficult to train in.
Correct. I don't have control of that. I can't have control of that. So as a pro wrestler, that's not really helpful, is it?
To say the least, but that's... Sorry, go ahead.
I appreciate that side of professional wrestling and like the supernatural, super theatrical. I think that's all fantastic. I think the idea of a gimmick and giving someone a gimmick or a character is kind of passé. Like, I think we're beyond that. I think mostly because pro wrestling now is a fully immersive experience where you must live as your character through the internet 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Whereas before, if it was contained within a weekly television show, you could be a vampire then and then just be a normal guy the rest of the time and it wouldn't matter. But now it does. So if you want to be a supernatural character, you really have to commit. Otherwise, it's better to just be yourself. And that's fully what I've chosen to do with my pro wrestling character and career, is to just be myself and then adapt it to have better matches. If I need to be a little bit more on the bad guy side, or need to lean fully into being a good guy, I can do that. But I appreciate people who don't. I appreciate people who chose to go hard on the gimmick and present themselves that way and go all in with it. I think that's amazing.
Well, and it's definitely something that you've done at least once in your career, and one of my favorite things that I've watched of you. Tell me about your experience wrestling as Shrek.
Yeah, that was the dumbest thing. I just made okay. I make a lot of really, really dumb tweets. Most of them are so dumb that they're not even worth tweeting, and they just live out in my drafts. And I show them to my partner Veda Scott, and I just show them the tweets, and like they just go, haha, that's funny. You can't tweet that, and then it just dies. And I wrote one that was tweet was just, if this gets 2,000 likes, I'll wrestle in full Shrek cosplay or something. And she was like, haha, tweet it. And then I did, and then it rapidly got more likes than I had asked. And then I was like, okay, I'll do it. I don't care. Uh, and then there was this place called Good Wrestling in England that were like, hey, we saw your tweet and we know you're booked on this show. You should do the Shrek match. And I was like,
We'll book you as Shrek.
Fine.
What a
Fine.
fantastic phone call to receive.
Right?
Are we going to see it again?
I have no idea. No clue. I have no plans to wrestle as Shrek again. I have no no concrete idea of when that could or could not happen. It might. I mean, if people ask for it, I wouldn't be opposed, but
it's okay. I feel like you and I have a lot of the same reactions as far as things goes, because there's a lot of tweets that I'll show my girlfriend here, and
yes,
she sort of does that. Oh, that's hilarious.
That's
Whereas at least yours are funny. Now, on Veda's side of things, she's obviously a fantastic individual, and for lack of a better way to put it, my notes here literally say #couple goals. But I think that anybody who wants to follow either of you guys can get a good glimpse of that themselves. But what I wanted to ask you guys about or yourself, I guess, was how has she influenced your wrestling career? Because I think you guys are both very great examples of driven individuals. You've done a lot of different things. How has she influenced or inspired you as far as that side of things goes?
She has a brilliant mind for professional wrestling. Mm-hmm. We think about it in the same way. And we've always helped each other. Like, being together at a wrestling show means that we're going to have a big amount of input on each other's matches. Like, mm-hmm. we'll always, like, I'm going to plan my match with my opponent, but I'm always going to go over back to her and relate to her. And then she'll go, oh, use this instead of that. And then this there, and then switch this, that. Oh, okay, no problem. And that's always been like a constant. So that's been great. In a more concrete way, like, obviously with the way my career went, I had to travel a lot, and I've had to travel a lot, and we have always been traveling together, or not always, but for like 4 years we traveled together, and that made it a lot simpler and a lot more like fun to organize. And things like, we're wrestling in England for 2 months, we have 5 days off, let's go to Paris for a week, or let's go to Vienna for a week, which we've been able to do are things that I probably would not have chosen to do by myself. Yeah. And it's also made, like, traveling for wrestling can get pretty lonely and pretty sad, and just being able to do it with someone whose company I enjoy so much has made the whole experience just that much better. So that's been very nice. But also, mostly, I think, like, a big part is, I mentioned my brother earlier, and I think something that's missing from wrestling is real, like, coaching. And I had it with my brother, and I have it with Veda now, and it's immensely helpful. But it's just having someone like whom you trust to always give you good feedback and sort of knows what you want to do with wrestling, and someone that you trust to be honest with you and well-meaning, which is the most part, because in wrestling, a lot of people are going to give you advice, but it's not always the best advice, especially from someone who doesn't know you, or they might not always like have the same goals. But having someone like my brother did, and like Veda, who knows exactly what I want and is not afraid to tell me, this was bad, don't do it, this was great, do more of it, because I fully trust them, is immensely helpful.
Oh, absolutely. And like, I guess the easy example for me is, like, it's pretty easy for me to sit and tell you you're great at pro wrestling, and it would be pretty hard for me to sit and pick something out of like a match you had with Bandito or something along those lines, where I could sit and say, oh, you could do this better. Whereas I would have to assume, like you say, she's a great mind, might be able to pick up those little things that normal people wouldn't be able to do.
Correct. And it's also the fact that, like, we've followed each other's career and evolution closely.
Yeah.
Right. Like, the worst thing is someone would say, like, oh, don't do this. Like, say some aspect is bad, but not realize that this aspect was terrible, and you've gotten way better at it, and that's been something that's difficult for you, and then someone just says, oh, that's bad because they haven't seen anything before, then that comment is
Mhm.
not helpful at all, because it's something like there is in my matches. There's a lot of things that I will choose to do because they're difficult and I'm not
Mhm.
very good at them, and I want to get better at them, so I put them in the match in order to be able to work on it in that
Yeah.
environment. And that takes knowledge of my career in order to be able to give accurate feedback on that.
Yeah, to notice like maybe this wasn't the best still, but you improved this much on the last time you did it. I'd
Right.
have to assume eventually a couple of months from now we're having these same conversations about my still terrible but definitely improving Japanese. I
Correct.
do want to ask though, you've talked about traveling a ton, you have traveled a ton. Do you think that might be the biggest opportunity for Canadian professional wrestlers? You're pretty unique for better or for worse as far as how you've had to approach your career. A lot of people talk about where the opportunities do lie for Canadian professional wrestlers, and that seems to be one of the things that people have brought up for me a lot. So maybe do you see that as the biggest chance that Canadians have to break their names out there a little more? Is it something as not simple but as obvious, I guess, as hopping on Twitch and doing things like you're doing, or where could that possibly change?
I don't know. I have no idea. Wrestling is Once wrestling in Canada starts happening regularly again, it's all going to be so different. And who knows how traveling is going to happen, when or
Yeah,
if that is ever possible in the same way again. Also, the situation with getting a contract and a work visa in the United States is completely different now from what it was, 5 years ago, where there's a lot more opportunities now and there's a lot more people being signed. And also, just like you mentioned, the internet is completely different now than it was 1 year ago before the
yeah,
pandemic. Things like Twitch and also like studio wrestling is a lot more accepted now, and is going to
yeah.
be a
Great
lot more of
point.
a viable option to get eyes on you internationally,
Yeah.
because like we've as the wrestling community has accepted that to be a thing that's happening now, and it's probably going to keep happening, or at least I hope keeps happening. But
Hmm.
it's a again, right now, given that I have no idea how anything is happening or is going to happen, it's a very difficult question to answer. The only thing I can say with certainty is that no matter where you are, whether it's Canada or like anywhere else, where you're in a slightly more difficult situation than if you're, let's say, just training in the United States, or in the right parts of the United States, is that you need to compare yourself on an international level. So many
Hmm.
wrestlers that are from smaller wrestling scenes make the mistake of comparing themselves with the other people on their local scene, and it's I guess it's nice if you're the best out of your 30 peers. That's a good
Hmm.
thing, but where do you rank internationally? That's a completely different thing.
It's a
So,
very good point because there are,
yep.
like you say, if there are 30, 40, 50 professional wrestlers that are in your local area, great, but there are thousands. Like extrapolate that by every possible territory you can, right?
Right.
What's the Quebec independent scene like right now? Obviously, I should say COVID notwithstanding, but you've been in it, like you say, for about 15 years at this point. How has it changed? And again, what do you sort of see as the wins and losses right now for it?
It was blooming. It was going great. Like I wrestling is very cyclical, right?
Hmm.
And I've seen the same growth happen in many different like territories and areas, and I can see it happen, and it always goes like this, where for some time you have one promotion that is very old school, then one someone in that promotion will get in a fight with someone and then create a second promotion, and then you'll have two promotions going at each other, and then eventually one of them is going to break out and a third promotion is going to start up. Now, out of the three promotions, two are going to align themselves together, and that'll help them grow a lot. And then from that, other little ones will sprout up, and that's when you have a scene.
Hmm.
I've seen it happen. I see it happening in various stages. I've been to places where it's happening across the world. I've seen it happen in Scandinavia. I've seen it happen in Singapore. That's how it happened in Quebec for a very long time. When I started wrestling in 2006, there was nothing. There was like two promotions and some other small ones,
Yeah.
until like someone was able to bridge, specifically Kevin Steen, El Generico, and a few other Canadians, Sexy Eddie, Green Phantom, Excess, and other guys were able to sort of bridge the gap and let promoters like incentivize promoters to bring in American wrestlers from other areas to come and wrestle them, and then that allowed everyone to grow. And before the pandemic, Canada, or at least Quebec/Ontario, because I know Canada is very big, was at the stage where promotions still run about once a month, but they fill out their venue.
Awesome.
Which is a pretty big deal, and but it's a common place for wrestling to go. British wrestling was there 2 years ago before things started getting even bigger, and then NXT UK happened, and now the pandemic, and it's a whole mess. But there were enough places for wrestlers to go wrestle 2, maybe 3 times a week in front of a reasonably sized audience and get good, like objectively good. And there were a ton of wrestlers before the pandemic that were wrestling in Canada and were getting very, very good. That should easily be on TV, absolutely world class.
Yeah.
And then sadly, it all blew up.
And then here we are.
Yep.
Now, it's kind of been nice for me when I've gone through and listened to podcasts you've done previously. Anytime anybody asks you who's a Canadian that you should watch out for or anything along those lines, you've always given a different answer, which I think speaks to not only the quality of Canada, but selfishly, it also gives me the excuse to ask you the same question. So maybe if there are a couple of Canadians out there, a couple of individuals on the wrestling scene that you think are underrated or in the cusp of a breakout or whatever definition you choose to take, who are some people to watch out for in the future?
I think the number one answer, if you know Canadian wrestling at all, and from doing Twitch and talking about this with a lot of people, is TDT. Tabarnak de Team, they're called.
Yeah.
They're a tag team from in Quebec, and they are absolutely fantastic. There's a lot of great wrestlers. There's fewer great tag teams. They are not only great individually, but they make a really, really solid team, and they know their dynamic. They know what to do. They're similar in a lot of ways, and they really like build off each other, which is rare for tag teams. But they're the name that sticks out in mind, that these guys should 1000% be on television and making millions of dollars with pro wrestling, and it's a shame that they're not.
I agree. And admittedly, I don't know if the match happened because it was announced right around sort of that start of pandemic time. But a friend of mine on Love Wrestling, Zach, he says, you've got to check this out. You got to promote it, the Wrestling Mustache Mountain. And I think, again, that sort of even just speaks to the quality of people like that are willing to come and work them. Obviously worth checking out. Worth checking out.
They have a great match with the Young Bucks on the IWS YouTube channel. So if you're looking for a great representative TDT match, that's a good one.
You've been part of some great tag teams. Of course, Moonlight Express was fantastic. What do you think makes a great tag team? You alluded to it a little bit there, but maybe expand on that a little if you could.
Yeah, I think it's the same advice on how to be a good wrestler that reflects on how to be a good tag team, but is just focus on your strengths. Like, obviously, one of the members is going to be better at other certain things, and it's really just bring out the best in both of you, understand the dynamic, understand how to help each other highlight your strengths. And that's really what works.
Makes sense. And I apologize for having to unplug and plug in my computer while we were going there. Tried to make it casual, but it didn't work great. Gives me an opportunity to transition though, because I do only want to touch on it a little bit. You've done a couple of podcasts previously, and there's no sense in me rehashing stuff on the border and stuff like that when let's look into the future with everything going on with it. As far as it goes, and at least if rumors are to be believed, you were supposed to go down on a work visa when you were banned at the border that didn't go through a CZW. But when it looks at promotions like CZW and the great stuff going on with guys like those, is it maybe your goal to get back there in the future and complete unfinished business? Or is it just get back and show the world what you can do on perhaps the biggest scale you can?
I feel like I'm ready to really take the next step with my career. And I'd like to try and reach for bigger things. If that's where it takes me, if that's what is the most logical choice. However, I would also be perfectly happy to remain an independent wrestler if I find that there's more for me in that aspect. But yeah.
Absolutely, man. Do you think, and maybe the positives or the silver linings might not be the best way to put it, but not getting the opportunity to work down there for so long, I think everybody's spoken very well of how good you've done as going out of Japan and going out and wrestling in the UK and making an international name for yourself. Is that maybe the positive you've been able to pull from the situation you had to go through? Or for lack of a better way to put it, is it something where it's like, yeah, that was great, but I wish I would have been able to do this?
It's really neither. I mean, there's no way to tell, like, if I had been able to wrestle in the United States for the last 5 years, if that even would have changed anything,
Mm-hmm.
or if I would have like maybe gotten miserable, or I'm glad the way things worked out. I'm very satisfied with what I've done with my career so far. Of course, I'd love to do more, but I'm happy with what I did. I've had great experiences. I've gotten a ton from pro wrestling, and I like to say that anything being different, it would have made it better is very hard to say. That it would have made it worse, quite possibly, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
very satisfied with the way things worked out.
I'm glad to hear that, man. And selfishly, again, as a fan of a Canadian professional wrestling icon, I'm just happy I've been able to watch you wrestle some great, great matches, not only over the last 5 years, but prior. Before we close it out and before I let you plug everywhere that you can be seen, everywhere you can be watched wrestle, hopefully in the near future, I've, of course, got to tackle off the one fan question. And excuse me as I try and read here and look like I'm not looking at you. They wanted to ask about your experiences with DDT. Obviously, you've wrestled there for a while. But their experience personally was that they sort of saw it as, quote, a comedy promotion and then start to watch the wrestling and really started to fall in love with it. So maybe what were your first impressions of DDT as a whole? And then why do you love working there so much?
So DDT has the best, easily. I think DDT does a lot of things right, but I think out of like the big shows, the 6 hours, like this promotion's big show of the year, DDT has the ones that are easily the most enjoyable to watch because there is so much variety in that. The
Yeah.
main events have been very like great, intense singles matches that are like as good as you would see in any other promotion.
Mm-hmm.
But then also on the undercard, you have a great like tag match, then a absolutely wild hardcore match, then some sort of rumble where the loser gets like hung up by their underpants from the ceiling, and then another like insane tag team title match, and then an anal explosion death match, and all kinds of ridiculous things. But the one common thread between everything they do in DDT is that it is all taken super seriously and carefully made to be as good as it possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
And the Japanese work ethic in general, but when it comes to pro wrestling, is absolutely astounding. Audiences are different all across the world, and in Japan more than anywhere else, they pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
So it's possible rather to tell complex stories with little details, and they do that very, very well. And for me to like learn that and get an as in-depth look on that and how to do that in pro wrestling as I did in Japan helped my career tremendously. And I think DDT, because it has so much variety, and in order to be a member of the DDT roster and be a wrestler for DDT, you need to be good at 5, 6, 7 different aspects of pro wrestling all at once.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, everyone has their strengths, and DDT plays to the wrestler's strengths, but you need to be able to adapt and do comedy, do great serious matches, do crazy hardcore wrestling, do ridiculous cinematic storylines with blow up dolls, and all of it.
Yeah, it's what I've come to love about it. I don't think that many people would look at a match saying Sammy Guevara versus Speedball Mike Bailey and say, this is going to be 15 minutes of people flipping each other off. But they also wouldn't be disappointed when they found out they would, you know? There's nothing I love more, my friend, than asking people about things they're very evidently passionate about. And it was just cool to watch your face light up when you're talking about them. And it was just incredibly cool to talk to you today. Like I said, man, and I don't mean it with any hyperbole, at least on my end. You're a Canadian wrestling icon. You're a guy who's done some great things for the professional wrestling industry in the country, but also a guy that has made a pandemic a lot easier because I've been able to sit down and watch a lot of Speedball Mike Bailey, whether it's wrestling or whether it's on Twitch. So thank you very much, man. If other people would like to do so, as I suggest that they do, where can people keep track of you online?
Number one place is Twitter. I'm Speedball Bailey on Twitter. I'm also Speedball Bailey on Instagram, though I do post on there a lot less. My Twitch is where I am most active recently. So I'm Speedball Bailey on Twitch. Also, I stream a few times a week. I post my schedule on my Twitter. There's also a Discord that you can find through Twitch, which is a lot of fun. I have a YouTube channel with a few YouTube interviews, and if you enjoyed conversations like this one, I've got some nice hour-long ones that might interest you as well, which I'm Speedball Mike Bailey on YouTube, and that is mostly it. However, the number one thing you can do if you would like to, if you enjoyed this interview and maybe have not seen some of my matches or would like to help me out, is go on YouTube, type in Speedball Mike Bailey. I've got plenty of matches on there. Watch some of them, watch one. And if you enjoy it, please share it around. Let your friends know, hey, I saw this guy on YouTube. I listened to an interview. He's pretty good. You should check him out. That is what helps me the most.
Well, and one thing that I love to say on the show, on Love Wrestling overall, is don't just support great professional wrestlers, support good people. You have certainly been one by taking the time for me and actually, enjoying your time with me. So I would highly suggest that if you guys have the chance, take his advice, share his matches. All of those can be found in the show notes below to any link to any of the ones that he's just mentioned. But if you want to continue to stay up to date with the latest and greatest in Canadian wrestling, keep track of myself, keep track of lovewrestling.ca. We've got more great guests like Speedball Mike Bailey coming up in the future. Thanks once again, friends. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.